They laughed at me across the table. Not loud laughter. The quiet kind. The kind that cuts deeper. My son leaned back in his chair and said, "Dad, you're retired. You don't really matter in this decision." His wife smirked. My daughter avoided my eyes. I stared at the dinner plate in front of me, my hands shaking. This was my house. The house I paid for. The table I built with my own hands. And they were deciding my future without me. "We're selling." My son said, "It's time you move somewhere smaller." I opened my mouth to speak, but his wife interrupted. "You should be grateful," she said. "At your age, you're just in the way." That word stayed with me. In the way. I nodded slowly. They thought I agreed. They had no idea I had already read the papers they didn't know I had. After dinner, I went to my room quietly. No one followed me. No one cared. That hurt more than the words. I sat on the bed and stared at the envelope in my drawer. The one I had found weeks earlier by accident. Legal documents. Signatures. Dates that didn't make sense. They thought I was old. Confused. Easy to push aside. I wasn't. I had worked 40 years without missing a day. I knew contracts. I knew numbers. And I knew when something was wrong. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed every moment. Every insult I ignored. Every time I stayed quiet to keep peace. Peace had cost me respect. By morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't beg. I would wait. And when the time came, I would let the truth speak louder than my voice ever had. The next weeks felt strange. They were kinder. Too kind. My son brought groceries. His wife smiled more. They thought I had accepted my place. I played the role perfectly. I asked simple questions. I nodded. I thanked them. Inside, I was counting days. I visited a lawyer quietly. A man my age. He listened without interrupting. When I showed him the papers, his face changed. "These aren't what they told you," he said. I nodded. "I know." He explained everything slowly, calmly. Ownership, authority, control. The house was still legally mine. They couldn't sell it without my consent. And the documents they signed behind my back, they meant more than they realized. I walked out of his office, feeling taller than I had in years. The family meeting was scheduled on a Sunday. They sat confident, relaxed. My son spoke first. "We found a buyer," he said. "All you need to do is sign." He slid papers toward me. I looked at them. Then I reached into my bag. I placed my documents on the table. Silence fell fast. His wife frowned. My daughter leaned forward. "What's that?" my son asked. I met his eyes. "The truth," I said. They laughed, until they read. Then the color drained from their faces. My son stood up suddenly. "This isn't funny," he said. I stayed seated. "I agree," I said quietly. "It never was." His wife tried to speak, but no words came out. I explained everything calmly. No anger. No shouting. Just facts. They had underestimated me, ignored me, tried to erase me. And now, they were the ones with nothing to say. For the first time in that house, they listened, and they were afraid. The room stayed quiet longer than it should have. My son's wife broke it first. "This doesn't change anything," she said. "We already agreed as a family." I folded my hands on the table. "I wasn't invited to that agreement," I said. My son rubbed his face. "Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder, like being called useless, was easy. I slid one paper forward. "This shows the house is still mine," I said. "Until I sign, nothing moves." They stared like the words were written in another language. My daughter finally spoke. "You planned this." I shook my head. I noticed it. That difference mattered. The meeting ended fast after that. No hugs. No goodbyes. Just doors closing harder than usual. That night, I heard them whispering in the kitchen. My name came up more times than I could count. For the first time in years, they weren't planning around me. They were planning for me. And they were scared. The pressure started the next morning. My son knocked on my door early. Too early. He brought coffee and a forced smile. "We can talk this out," he said. I let him talk. He spoke about offers, about market timing, about my comfort. Not once did he say sorry. When he finished, I asked one question. Why didn't you tell me before? He had no answer. That told me everything. Later that day, his wife tried a softer approach. She cooked dinner. She laughed louder. I worry about you being alone, she said. I smiled politely. I've been alone in this house for years, I replied. Her smile slipped. That night, I called my lawyer again. Things were moving faster now. People only rush when they know they're losing control. The buyer showed up unannounced 2 days later. Nice suit, confident walk. He shook my hand and said, I'm excited about the property. I raised an eyebrow. Property? He froze. My son stepped in quickly. There's been a misunderstanding. I laughed softly. Yes, I said, there has. The buyer left soon after, confused and embarrassed. That was when my son snapped. You're ruining everything, he shouted. I stood up slowly. No, I said, I'm stopping it. His wife screamed that I was selfish, ungrateful. I listened calmly. Then I said something I had never said before. This is my home, and I am done being quiet. They stared at me like they didn't recognize me. Maybe they didn't. The next move came from their side. Legal letters. Threats wrapped in polite words. I wasn't surprised. I brought everything to my lawyer. He read carefully, then smiled. They don't have a case, he said. That night, my daughter came to my room. She looked tired. I didn't know they went that far, she said. I nodded. You didn't ask. She cried quietly. I didn't comfort her, not out of anger, out of honesty. Everyone was learning something now, including me. The court date was set faster than I expected. My son looked nervous for the first time. In the waiting room, his wife avoided my eyes. I sat straight, holding my folder. The judge asked simple questions. Who owned the house? Who signed what? Who tried to move things without consent? The answers were clear. When the judge ruled, the room felt smaller. The house stayed with me. All plans stopped. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I held the papers that ended. Everything they tried to do behind my back. And they finally understood. I was never useless. They just hoped I was. The ride home from court was quiet. No one spoke to me. No one offered help. My son walked ahead of me like I wasn't there. At home, doors closed harder than usual. That night, I sat alone in the living room and listened to the house settle. Every sound reminded me why this place mattered. I hadn't just paid for these walls. I had built a life inside them. The next morning, my son announced they would be making other arrangements. He didn't ask if I needed anything. They packed fast. Too fast. I watched from the hallway as boxes moved past me. Not one of them said, thank you. That hurt more than the insults ever had. But I stayed calm. I had learned something important. Silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was control. Once they left, the house felt different. Quiet but honest. I walked through each room slowly. Memories came back in waves. Birthdays. Late nights. Arguments I swallowed to keep peace. I realized how much space I had given up trying to be easy to live with. That afternoon, I changed the locks. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. My lawyer called to check in. You handled yourself well, he said. I thanked him. Then he added, you might want to prepare for backlash. He was right. That evening, messages started coming in. Relatives, friends. Some said I was brave. Others said I went too far. I didn't reply. For once, I didn't need approval. A week later, my daughter asked to meet. She looked nervous, sitting across from me. I didn't know how bad it was, she said. I believed her. But belief didn't erase choice. You saw enough, I replied calmly. She nodded slowly. I stayed quiet, she admitted. That hurt, more than yelling ever could. She asked if she could come back home sometime. I told her yes. But things would be different now. Respect wasn't optional anymore. She understood. Or at least, she said she did. My son didn't call. Not once. Instead, I heard things through others. They were struggling. Money was tight. Plans had fallen apart. I felt no joy hearing that. Just distance. I focused on myself. I fixed things in the house I had ignored for years. Painted walls. Repaired doors. Each small task reminded me I still had purpose. That word echoed in my mind. Purpose. They said I had none. They were wrong. One evening, I found an old letter in a drawer. It was from years ago. My son had written it as a teenager. It said, "Thanks for always taking care of us." I sat there holding it for a long time. I didn't cry. I smiled, because I finally understood something. Taking care of others should never mean disappearing. And I was done disappearing. Weeks passed, and the house slowly felt like mine again. I woke up without tension in my chest. I moved through rooms without feeling watched. Neighbors noticed. One afternoon, a man from across the street said, "Looks peaceful over there now." I smiled. It is... I started spending mornings in the garden. My hands remembered the work. So did my mind. I thought about how easily people confuse age with weakness. How silence is mistaken for surrender. I had let that happen for too long. But not anymore. My son finally called. No greeting. No apology. "We need to talk," he said. We met in a cafe. He looked tired. Older somehow. He blamed stress. Bad timing. Misunderstandings. I listened. When he finished, I said, "You made decisions without me." He nodded. "That's why we're here." I continued. "This is a result." He asked if things could go back to normal. I answered honestly. No, normal had hurt me. Word spread through the family. Some sided with me. Some didn't. One relative said, "You should just let it go." I smiled politely. Letting it go would have meant losing myself. I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. I noticed something strange. The people who were angry were the same ones who benefited from my silence before. That told me everything. I hosted dinner one night. Just a few friends. Laughter filled the house again. Real laughter. No tension. No whispers. One friend said, "You seem lighter." I was. Because dignity weighs less when you carry it yourself. Late that night, I sat at the table alone. I looked at the papers again. The ones that ended everything. They weren't just documents. They were proof. Proof that I still mattered. Proof that respect doesn't expire. I folded them carefully and placed them away. I didn't need to look at them anymore. The lesson had already settled in. Time changed how people spoke to me. They no longer told me what was happening. They asked. That shift felt bigger than the court ruling. I noticed my son's voice sounded careful now when he left messages. He chose words instead of throwing them. I didn't return every call. Not to punish him. To protect myself. I had spent years being available to everyone except me. That season was over. One afternoon, my daughter visited. She helped me fix a loose cabinet door. We worked quietly. At one point, she said, "I didn't think they would go that far." I nodded. People do when they think you won't stop them. She looked at me then. Really looked. "I'm proud of you," she said. That meant more than any apology. The house sold months later. Not because I was forced. Because I chose to move on. I downsized on my terms. The papers were clean, fair, respectful. As I signed, the lawyer smiled and said, "You held your ground." I smiled back. I had learned how. On moving day, I stood in the empty living room. I wasn't sad. I was grateful. This house had given me one last lesson. Never disappear to make others comfortable. Never confuse patience with permission. They called me old and useless. They thought time had taken my power. They were wrong. Time gave it back to me. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I waited. And when I held the papers that ended everything, I realized the truth. I had never lost my worth. I had just stopped proving it.